six libraries now. Okay, six libraries: Bayville, Glen Cove, Gold Coast, Locust Valley, Oyster Bay, and Seacliff, that have come together to bring our patrons more of a various of in adult programs in a more cost-effective way. We hope you enjoy the programs. Um, our next program is the films of Alfred Hitchcock. Please go to your library's website to register. Today's program is hosted by the Seacliff Library. Out of respect for our presenter and other participants, please be kindly to ask or remain muted during the program. If there is any questions or answer, you can unmute at the time if you want to participate. Without further ado, here is Evan Weiner with a fantastic program, The Olympics.
Yeah, thank you, Rosa, and the Seacliff Library for inviting me. My name is Evan Weiner. My background is television. Sam Donaldson show 20 years ago. Radio, where I spent most of my career. I even wrote op-ed pieces about 23 years ago for Newsday. Also, I've written for other newspapers and magazines, and because I've gotten too old and I still want to be in communications, I give talks. And this talk is about the Olympics and the politics of the Olympics, and how the Olympics is more than just a sports event. It is a worldwide platform for countries, for ideologies, and for advertisers. As you can see here, the 1936 Olympics, and there is Adolf Hitler. The Games as a political platform: 1936 Berlin Games, 1964 South Africa thrown out of the Olympics because of apartheid, 1968 Mexico City human rights protests with John Carlos and Tommy Smith, the Munich Massacre, 1972, 1976 African countries boycott. That's because South Africa played New Zealand in a non-Olympic event, and the Olympics would, or the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, would not throw New Zealand out of the Olympics. 1980, the U.S. Olympic boycott, followed by the Soviet Union-led boycott in 1984. Now the Olympics have become more sophisticated when they award the games. You better send your leader to genuflect before the International Olympic Committee if you want to get an Olympics, like Tony Blair did in 2005 for England, or like Vladimir Putin did in 2007 for Russia. Tony Blair, Vladimir Putin begged the International Olympic Committee for Olympic Games in 2005 and 2007. Blair got the 2012 Summer Olympics for London, and Putin got his hands and knees. He got onto his hands and knees and secured the 2014 Winter Games for the Russian Black Sea resort in Sochi. And Barack Obama, went to Copenhagen to beg and plead with the International Olympic Committee, please give us the 2016 Summer Olympics in Chicago. And this is what Obama said, or actually before he gets there, this is what Richard Pound, Dick Pound, who was the Canadian IOC delegate until recently, Dick Pound, a lawyer from Montreal, said about Obama in 2009. Olympic bids are so important these days to the countries that it would be a bit surprising for a country not to send its biggest hitters. If the U.S. doesn't match the others, that's something that will be noticed. I love you, Lula. Lula was the leader of Brazil at that point, and maybe the most popular politician on earth back in 2008, 2009. Here's Obama talking about his Olympic failure in 2009. I remember this vividly when Chicago had the bid for the 2016 Olympics. Very effective committee had flown to Copenhagen to make their presentation, and Michelle had gone with them, Michelle Obama. Got a call, I think before the thing ended, but on fairly short notice, that everybody thought if I flew out there, we would have a good chance of getting it, and it might be worth essentially just taking a one-day trip. So we fly out there. Let's forget about what's going on in Washington. Let's go to Copenhagen. Subsequently, I think we've learned that the IOC's decisions are similar to FIFA's decisions. FIFA is the governing body of the men's and women's World Cup. And by the way, the men's World Cup will be played in 2026 in Canada, the United States, and in Mexico. Back to Obama. IOC decisions are similar to FIFA's decisions, a little bit cooked. Actually, it's more than just a little bit cooked. You might want to add a R to that word cooked and drop the ed and add some more letters. Anyway, but that's from my dealings with the IOC and FIFA. We didn't even make the first cut, despite the fact that by all objective metrics, the American bid was the best. Now, I got a question for you. And by the way, if you have anything that you want to add, just type it in and we'll get to it. I take questions that way. I don't wait until the end. And it just makes it easier for me because that's the way I am. Anyway, the United Nations. The United Nations has a big role in the International Olympic Committee and in the Olympics. The IOC has permanent observer status at the United Nations. The IOC acts in many ways as a sovereign nation and has been requiring presidents, prime ministers, and other leaders to appear before them in the Olympics bidding. But the former IOC president Thomas Bach said his committee is not a super world government and has no ability to influence global political issues. Except they do. The IOC, the International Olympic Committee. Around 2005, the international sports community fell in love with the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and decided those countries had the economics and the economies that were really heating up, and it was time to get a piece of the action. Rio 2016. Brazil had oil, lots of it, had the money to invest in sporting events. But the global economy cratered in September 2008 and the price of oil dropped significantly. But the drop in oil prices and the staggering costs of the World Cup, which Brazil hosted in 2014, and the Olympics ended Brazil's ascendancy into the world of the big boys economy. Go home. We're not interested in the Olympics. Paris and Los Angeles basically were given the Olympics. Nobody but Paris and LA wanted the Olympics in 2024. Nobody seemed to want the LA Olympics, or what became the LA Olympics, in 2028. So in 2017, in an unprecedented move, the Olympic Committee gave LA the Olympics 11 years beforehand. Usually it's 7, but it's 11 in this case. The International Olympic Committee saw Boston and Budapest and Rome and Hamburg drop out of the bidding for the 2024 Summer Games. There were just 2 cities that wanted the 2022 Winter Olympics. Beijing, China got that. St. Moritz, Switzerland, and Quebec City dropped out of the running for the 2026 Winter Games. The modern Olympics began in Athens in 1896. The games became politicized very, very quickly. In fact, there were no women at the first Olympics in 1896. 1896, the Olympics returned. The first modern Olympic Games took place in its ancient birthplace, Greece. The Games attracted athletes from 14 nations, with the largest delegations coming from Greece, Germany, France, and Great Britain. That is an Olympic tennis player, 1900. She, of course, is a woman. Women can compete, but they can't be seen. They really can't be seen. They have to wear a hat, have to wear clothing up to their neck, and they have to keep their feet covered. That's what the Olympics wanted from a woman. Now, she competed in 1900. This is the Anthropology Days. This is something that the Olympics wants to bury. It was part of the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. And that is a guy from Africa, and he's throwing a javelin. Anthropology Days, in which a group of savages, quote unquote savages, recruited from the fair's international villages, competed in a variety of athletic feats. Among them, a greased pole climb, ethnic dancing, mudslinging, for the amusement of Caucasian spectators. And that's a very important part of all of this, the Caucasian spectators. James E. Sullivan brought the games to St. Louis to coincide with the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. The two-day event was meant to show Anglo-America's culture superiority and how savages could not compete in sports. For Sullivan, however, the games were at least partially successful because the savages demonstrated that they couldn't play a proper game of tennis. Sullivan considered the natives' failure to beat the Olympic record for the javelin a sure sign of racial inferiority. The Anthropology Days experiment was a one-shot deal as an Olympics event. In the Olympics today, they tried to distance themselves from what was going on in 1904. This is Baron Pierre Coubertin, and Coubertin rather, and he is the guy who brought the Olympics back. And he is the guy that the French would call a chauvinist because he didn't want women in the Olympics. De Coubertin, the founder of the International Olympic Committee, said, as for that outrageous charade, and he was talking about 1904 in this case, it will, of course, lose its appeal when black men, red men, and yellow men learn to jump, run, and throw, and leave the white men behind them. And also, you should exclude women. Women should not be part. These women are scantily clad. They were swimmers, and they were scantily clad. They should have been more like the woman in the back. The IOC president, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, tried to marginalize women's sports. After the 1912 Stockholm Games, he and many of his IOC colleagues believed an Olympiad with females would be impractical, uninteresting, unaesthetic, and improper. I'm going to stop here. You can answer this if you want. What is, at least in the United States, what is the most watched event of the Summer Olympics? Anybody want to guess? Or I'll even do the Winter Olympics. In the United States, what is the most watched on TV, on streaming services event of the Olympics? I'll give you 5 more seconds.
I'd say it's women's ice skating.
Women's women's ice skating in the winter, women's gymnastics in the summer. That's basically, it's figure skating. You threw me with ice skating, but it's figure skating. But those are the two most watched events of the Olympics when they're on over-the-air TV on NBC. Coubertin, the games were created for the solemn and periodic exaltation of male athleticism, with female applause as a reward. No women allowed? Not in Pierre's world. De Coubertin was convinced that women, like other weak members of society, which I actually have a question about this. If women are considered the fairer sex, and they're considered weaker sex, come they outlive men. Anyway, weak members of society such as children and the elderly were not made for physical activity. Sports was too violent for them based on biological differences. De Coubertin feared that women's athletic exhibitions would erode society's morals by arousing the passions of male spectators. He was worried that the men were going to get turned on watching a woman play tennis covered from head to toe. These were swimmers in 1912, and they're pretty much covered. The 1914 IOC General Session made it clear no women to participate in track and field, but as before, allowed to participate in fencing and swimming. Well, they did not have to worry about the 1916 Olympics. That was canceled because of World War I. But Alice Milliere was very, very, very upset with the International Olympic Committee. She was a rower, and she wanted to compete in the Olympics. So she decides the next best thing is, well, if I can't compete with the men, why don't we do a women's Olympics? And she pulled it off. Women's Olympics is an alternative to the male-centric games. In total, 4 women's games were staged in 1922 Paris, 1926 Gothenburg, Sweden, 1930 Prague, 1934 London, with the participants coming mostly from North America, Western Europe, and Japan. This is what the New York Times reported in 1922 about the Olympics, the Women's Olympics. 1922 was notable for the development of women's athletes in all branches of competitions fitting to their sex. Remarkable progress was made by them. In almost overnight, they assumed a place of great prominence in the world of athletics. 1936. Well, there was some politicalization of the games. Obviously, 1916, because of World War I, there were no games. Oh, by the way, women were coming back into the men's-centric Olympics by 1932 because they proved that they were worthy of it. Jesse Owens, gold medal winner. Now, I'm going to just say this about 1936. I'm an old guy now. I worked with Marty Glickman. I knew Sam Stoller. And they were both denied their chance at running in the 4x100 meter relay race in Berlin. And I got, Marty was a guy who talked about it all the time. Sam was a very quiet guy by nature, never talked about it. But Marty did the talking for both of them. U.S. planned to boycott the 1936 Berlin Summer Olympics was formulated in December 1935. Avery Brundage, the head of the U.S. Olympic Committee, overrules the American Athletic Union, which picks the athletes and tells Olympians they better compete in Berlin. And Franklin Roosevelt said the athletes should go because they're athletes. They're not politicians. Let the politicians handle the problem. So these three people, I knew Marty, I knew Sam, and interviewed Gretel Bergman / Margaret Lambert about 32 years ago. Jesse Owens also, and others, are also impacted by the Berlin Games. And there's Marty, and there is Sam. The day before their event, the 4x100 meter relay, they were replaced by Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalfe, the team's two fastest sprinters. Coaches claimed they needed their fastest runners to win the race. Glickman said, and if you said hello to Marty, Marty would tell you this. Glickman said that Coach Dean Cromwell and Avery Brundage, who is the head of the U.S. Olympic Committee, were motivated by anti-Semitism and the desire to spare the furor, the embarrassment of two American Jews on the winning podium. Stoller didn't believe that anti-Semitism was involved, but the 21-year-old described the incident in his diary as the most humiliating episode in his life. This is Marty. This is what he said in his biography, and this is what, not only in his biography, but he would tell you this. We were shocked. Sam was completely stunned. Didn't say a word in the meeting. Well, like I said, Sam didn't speak that much. He ran the Milrose Games at Madison Square Garden. I was a brash 18-year-old kid. And I said, Coach, you can't hide world-class sprinters. At which point Jesse spoke up and said, Coach, I've won my 3 gold medals, 100, 200, and long jump. I'm tired. I've had it. Let Marty and Sam run. They deserve it, said Jesse. And Cromwell pointed his finger at him and said, you'll do as you're told. In those days, black athletes did as they were told. Jesse was quiet after that. So Draper and Wyckoff stay, and Marty and Sam are replaced by Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalfe. 2 weeks before the Olympics began, German officials informed Jewish athlete Gretel Bergman that she was denied a place on the team, although she had equaled the German women's record in the high jump. The Germans sacrificed a chance for a gold medal with this action. By the way, one other thing about Marty. Marty and I talked about, what would have happened if you competed? And he said, of course, we would have won. And I said, and then what would have happened? He said, we would have gone on the podium, me and Sam, medals around our necks, take the medals off, put that gold medal in Hitler's face and show him that you could not intimidate us two from New York City. Gretel Bergman I met in 1993. Margaret Lambert was her American name. She married a guy by the name of Dr. Bruno Lambert. And I meet her in 1993, do an interview with her at the New York Athletic Club. on 58th Street on 8th around 8th Avenue, Central Park West, and we got to talking, and generally back in those days, everybody else gave me, for whatever reason, a wide berth to ask the first question. And I could ask you that. Well, no, let me give you a background before I do that. 1933, the Third Reich tightened the reins on the Jews, but not on Gretel Bergman. They allowed her to compete at various levels, and she knew that she was a special one, and that they were going to string her along, and she was never going to be in 1936 Olympics. So I'm about ready to ask her a question, and I only have a one-word question for her. Why? Her answer was, because I wanted to show our people there was some hope when there was almost no hope. I wanted to give them something to hang on to. I really wanted to give them something to hang on to. And I figured if I was on the team, maybe, there would be some hope. I knew I was never going to be on that team. And she was kicked off the team, and she found out shortly thereafter she was just another Jew in Germany. She was no big deal. And there she was. And she was probably the best athlete in Europe at that time, Gretel Bergman. I was a great Jewish hope. 1937, Gretel Bergman was able to obtain papers that allowed her to immigrate to the United States. She landed in New York City with no more than $10, all the money the Germans would allow her to take out of the country. She worked as a masseuse and a housemaid, and later as a physical therapist, but she married a doctor. Made her mother happy. She married a doctor. Dr. Bruno Lambert was also an Olympic athlete, and he came over with her in 1937, also with no more than $10. They ended up getting married around 1942. He became a successful doctor. They lived in Forest Hills in Queens, and they both lived to an old age. Both of them 103 years old. Gretel Bergman died in 2007. And Dr. Bruno Lambert died 4 years earlier, both of them 103 years old. Bergman continued to participate in sports and won the 1937 and 1938 U.S. Women's High Jump Championships, in addition to the 1937 Shot Put Championships. She married Dr. Bruno Lambert in 1938 and got her citizenship in 1942. She faded into obscurity until her introduction into the Jewish Hall of Fame at the Wingate Institute in Israel in 1980, and all of a sudden, she was rediscovered after 44 years. She got a gold medal from the Olympic Committee in 1996, 60 years later in Atlanta, because they knew she was going to win a gold medal back in 1936. There were two guys at HBO at that point, Russ Levinson and a guy named Fuchs, who wanted to do a special on her. And they persuaded her. I said, you ever go back to Germany? That was in 1993. She said, no, never going back to Germany, never going to buy a Ford, never going to buy a Mercedes-Benz. But they said, your story needs to be told on video. And she was persuaded to return in 1999 to Germany. The stadium that she trained in Lapham, was renamed in her honor. They did do the special on HBO. It's called Hitler's Pawn, P-A-W-N. If you could find it, it is well worth the 1 hour. It is a terrific special. It was also an HBO special on Marty Glickman that came out a little later, both dealing with the same topic. Germany restored her sports records in 2009. She dies at the age of 103 in 2017. The games itself, Jesse Owens is the star. Adolf Hitler had hoped that the 1936 Berlin Games would prove his theory of Aryan racial superiority. Owens won 4 gold medals in the 100 meter, 200 meter, 400 meter relay, and the long jump. He set 3 world records. One of those records was in the 4x100 meter relay. But Owens is snubbed by Franklin Roosevelt. And all the other African-American athletes are not invited to the White House. Of course, political Etiquette in those days, 1936, especially when you need Southern Democrats to vote for you, as FDR did, don't invite any African Americans to the White House, and he doesn't. Owen said, Hitler didn't snub me, it was Roosevelt who snubbed me. The president didn't even send a telegram. Roosevelt never publicly acknowledged Owen's triumphs or the triumphs of any of the 18 African Americans who competed at the Berlin Olympics. Only white Olympians were invited to the White House in 1936. Relatives of Jesse Owens and the other 17 African Americans who competed at the 1936 Olympics were welcomed back to the White House by President Barack Obama in 2016 in the celebration of their lives and accomplishments. Why the snub? Roosevelt, running for re-election, probably did not want to upset members of his own party, Southern Democrats who enacted Jim Crow laws after the Civil War. South Africa, 1964. White area. African South Africans or black Afrikaners cannot swim in the water. Please boycott apartheid sports. On August 18th, 1964, South Africa banned from taking part in the 18th Olympic Games in Tokyo over its refusal to condemn apartheid. Mexico City, 1968. In the middle is Tommy Smith, who, not ironically, who, by the way, was my wife's cousin's track and field coach at Oberlin College in Ohio in the late 1970s, and to this day they keep in touch. He's in the middle, John Carlos is on the right, and Peter Norman, the Australian, is on your left, and he's the guy who suffers the most from this protest. 1968 Olympics, John Carlos and now Dr. Tommy Smith protested human rights violations on the podium after the 200-meter event the United States during the United States national anthem. Australian Peter Norman joined them wearing human rights badges on their warm-up jackets. The protest shook the games. Norman was denied another Olympics chance. The three were supporting the Olympic Project for Human Rights. It would not be until 2012, 6 years after his death, that the Australian Parliament apologized to Peter Norman for the way the country treated him. They wouldn't let him on the 1972 Olympic team. Now, this is Brent Musburger, and I know Brent Musburger, and the less I say about Brent Musburger, the better off I am. Like I said, I know him, and I'm going to leave it at that. But in 1968, he's writing a column for a newspaper, the Chicago American, and this is what he said about Smith and Carlos. Smith and Carlos look like a couple black-skinned stormtroopers holding aloft their black-gloved hands during the playing of the national anthem. They sprinkled their symbolism with black track shoes and black scarves and black power medals. It's destined to go down as the most unsuitable demonstration in the history of protest. Brent Musburger, August 1968. He was still at it in 2017. This is Twitter. And he talked about Colin Kaepernick taking a knee during the national anthem in 2016. And he writes, yo, 49ers, since you instigated protests, 2 wins and 19 losses, how about taking your next knee in the other team's end zone? Now, he has seen both Smith and Carlos over the years, and both Smith and Carlos would like to talk to him, and every time Musburger sees them, he runs away. He cannot face them. Oh, by the way, Smith and Carlos kept their medals. They were never asked to return them to the International Olympic Committee. 1972, the ultimate massacre, protest, event, incident, the Munich 11. 9 Israeli athletes and 2 coaches are killed. The massacre. It is the first time that you see terrorism in your living room. It's on ABC. And as a journalist and somebody who worked in TV, I have to hand it to Jim McManus, Jim McKay, because he did a wonderful job, an absolute wonderful job in holding the broadcast together for about 14 straight hours. I had an opportunity to do a show with Jim in 1995. It was going to be a radio show, and Jim was signed up. And then at the end of the day, he said, "You know what? I've had it. I've done this for a long time. All I want to do is go back to Baltimore and watch horse races at the Preakness racetrack." And so that was that. I understood that, and somebody else got that show. We weren't successful. We might not have been successful with Jim, but Jim, I have the utmost respect for Jim and also the job that he did back in 1972 with the massacre. Day of Terror began at 4:30 in the morning on September 5th, 1972. That's 10:30 New York time, September 4th, when 8 Palestinian militants affiliated with Black September. I don't know if you know anything about Black September, but in 1970, that group twice tried to assassinate King Hussein of Jordan. Black September, a militant offshoot of the Palestinian group Fatah, scaled a fence surrounding the Olympic Village in Munich, disguised as athletes, and using stolen keys, they forced their way into the quarters of the Israeli Olympic team. About 10 o'clock on September 5th at night, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, New York and Washington time, believing that they had reached an agreement, the terrorists led their bound and blindfolded hostages from their quarters into buses that transported them to waiting helicopters. And there is Jim McManus, Jim McKay. By 12:30, that is local time, in Munich, 6:30, right in time for the evening news on ABC, NBC, and CBS, on September 5th, September 6th in Munich, the shooting had stopped, and the 20-hour reign of terror was over. 11 Israelis had been killed, along with 1 Munich policeman, and 5 Black September terrorists lay dead. 3 of the gunmen were captured. At 3 a.m. local time, and let me just back this up for a second. Jim was relaxing. He was swimming, and he was doing absolutely nothing. This, of course, being 1 o'clock in the afternoon, just relaxing when this ordeal starts. And they tell him, you got to get on. Don't worry about your swim trunks. Don't worry about your flip-flops. Just put a short tie and jacket on. Nobody's going to see you from the neck, from the waist up. And just go there and just do the job. Just do the job. Now, Howard Cosell, who I was friendly with, and still friendly with his three of his grandkids, Colin and Justin and Jared, who's an ESPN lawyer, wanted to be on. He said, I should be on. Jim McManus is a fine guy, but I knew what it was like to be Jewish because those Irish kids used to chase me up Eastern Parkway. And I looked at Howard. Howard, you're 6'3". You were a Marine sergeant during World War II. You must have been bigger than any of the other kids. He said, but they still chased me. Well, that was Howard's story. Anyway, after 14 straight hours, he summarized the tragic outcome of the botched rescue with the words, they're all gone. The German authorities never did storm Building 31. They allowed the terrorists to take the hostages by helicopter to a nearby airbase. There, the Germans had planned an ambush and rescue operation, but it was bungled badly. The 9 Israeli hostages were killed by a combination of terrorist gunfire and a hand grenade that one of the Palestinians set off in a helicopter as it sat on the ground. And of course, 2 more were killed. Dick Nixon, and I knew Dick Nixon, and I met him for the first time in 1985 when he was the arbitrator of the Major League Baseball umpires dispute and the Major League owners, and he gave the umpires a 40% raise, and I got to know him a little bit, and he said to me one day after I said, hey, Mr. President, how you doing today? No, Evan, and he knew my name. No, Evan, call me Dick. So it was always Dick Nixon to me. Dick Nixon, in a letter to Avery Brundage, had demanded that the rest of the games be called off. He's only the most powerful man in the world, but Brundage didn't care. The games must go on. A memorial service on September 6th, Brundage announced that the games would continue. He had once said in an interview prior to the 1972 Munich Olympics that the 1939 Berlin Summer Games was the finest ever. He would be a central character in German Olympics history. Now, I did an interview with Mark Spitz in 1999, and I am going to read that interview verbatim. He was the big star of the Olympics back in 1972, winning all those gold medals in swimming. So this is his story. This is not me interpreting this. This is his story. This was an interview I did in 1999 at the Helmsley Palace at an event. The Jewish-American swimmer Mark Spitz, who had set a record of winning 7 gold medals, was spirited out of Munich to London in fear that he would be a target of other terrorists. A news conference celebrating Spitz's achievements was hurriedly canceled. This is Mark Spitz talking to me back in 1999. The swimming program had stopped. I swam all of my events. And that evening, the last day of competition was on a Monday, and this happened on a Tuesday morning. Swimming was through, so I didn't have to compete anymore. Had a press conference right afterwards on Tuesday, and that was when everyone told me about this Israeli tragedy, or the thing that was happening at the time. Hadn't turned into a major tragedy at the moment, or at least at that time. They didn't know much about it. The next day, I was whisked away. Now, Howard Cosell one day said to me about Avery Brundage, he became of age during the time of William of Orange. So I went to Delft in the Netherlands, and I was walking through Delft, and not far from the castle where William of Orange hung out, there's a bar called William van Orange, and I took a picture of it, sent it to Cosell's grandkids, and they said to me, you knew Papa really well. Papa, who was dead at this point, Papa would have been really proud of me. That's probably like why he liked you. Anyway, Brundage, who is not friends with the Israelis, offered a 27-word tribute to our Israeli friends. Brundage, who was the IOC, and the IOC ordered the competitions to resume after a pause of 34 hours. I once interviewed Frank Shorter, who was running an event during the Olympics. He said, yeah, I was about right. We should have competed. Kenyans leave Montreal. Those are the Kenyans, and that's the airport in Montreal. And this is another Olympics boycott. 25 African-American countries boycott the 1976 Montreal Olympics to protest New Zealand's sporting links to South Africa. New Zealand sent a rugby team to play in South Africa, which was being shunned because of apartheid. The IOC refused to bow to a request by African countries to ban New Zealand. South Africa was dropped from the Olympics in 1964. There's another thing that came out of this, and it's an important part of the Olympics today. This is the Olympic Stadium in Montreal, which was nicknamed the Big O, but O is spelled O-W-E. The legacy of the Montreal Summer Olympics 1976 is debt. Olympic Stadium was supposed to cost $250 million Canadian, but ended up with a price tag of $1.74 billion. Stadium is still a financial drain after being renovated, and it is being renovated again. The city, province, and Canada didn't pay off the 1976 Montreal Olympics debt until November 2006, or 30 years after the closing ceremonies. That is my son. That is Jim Craig, one of the heroes of the 1980 United States Olympic gold medal winning hockey team. And this was back in 1995, Jim Craig and my son. The Soviets invaded Afghanistan on Christmas Eve, 1979. On December 27, 1979, Barak Karmal, exiled leader of the Parsham faction of the Marxist People Democratic Party of Afghanistan, was installed as Afghanistan's new head of government. And Soviet ground forces entered Afghanistan from the north. Factions of rebel fighters across the country began to unite to form the Mujahideen, a word that means those engaged in jihad in Arabic. The groups crossed ethnic and ideological lines, but initially were defectives from the Afghan army. They were funded by the United States and Pakistan. Jimmy Carter is annoyed with the Soviet Union, so much so that he sets a deadline that they better get out of Afghanistan. They're not listening to him. The Carter Doctrine, which said that the Soviets' attempt to gain control of Afghanistan and possibly the region, and there was oil involved in that, and shipping the oil through Afghanistan out to open waters, was regarded as a threat to U.S. interests, and Carter was prepared to meet the threat with military force. Jimmy Carter's official announcement came on January 20th, in the form of an ultimatum on meet the press, unless the Soviets withdraw their troops within a month from Afghanistan. He would insist that the Olympic Games be moved from Moscow to an alternative site or multiple sites, or postponed or canceled. Now, the United States Olympic hockey team, they're in Lake Placid, New York. A couple weeks prior to being in Lake Placid, they were plastered by the Soviet hockey team at Madison Square Garden. And not too many people expected very much from this hockey team. After all, they were a bunch of college guys with one pro, Mike Eruzione, being coached by a college guy by the name of Herbie Brooks. Call him Herbie Brooks, not Herbie. I got to know Herbie Brooks over the years. On February 24th, 1980, the United States hockey team beat Finland to win the gold medal at the Lake Placid Olympics in upstate New York. Achievement, yes. But the American team 2 days earlier beat the Soviet Union in a game many did not see or even know that was being played. They knew about it later. It was played on tape delayed. The only people who could watch it live were on the border towns of Canada. Buffalo, you could see it. You could see it in Vermont, New Hampshire, parts of Maine, parts of Michigan, parts of Minnesota, and North Dakota, and Montana, and Washington State. That's it, just the border towns. The Americans, made up of mostly college players, upset the heavily favored Soviet team with the Cold War setting the stage. Soviets set up shop in Afghanistan. The Olympics became a bigger-than-life stage. In the miracle on ice, the Americans win the game. Mike Eruzione scoring the go-ahead goal, actually breaking a scoreless tie. That hockey game took place on February 22nd. Because the Americans had won, the game took on a life of its own. It's become known as the Miracle on Ice because of the ABC announcer Al Michaels' end-of-game call. Do you believe in miracles? Yes. The Lake Placid game was the first ever event where the USA chant was heard. Carter called the team to congratulate them for beating the Soviets. It was only a game, but politically and culturally, it was the most significant sports matchup, at least in North America. Maybe the India-Pakistan cricket games are bigger, more people see them anyway there, of the 20th century. Boycott. Should we boycott the Olympics? On March 21st, President Jimmy Carter announces that the U.S. will boycott the Olympic Games scheduled to take place in Moscow that summer. The announcement came after the Soviet Union failed to comply with Carter's February 20th, 1980 deadline to withdraw its troops from Afghanistan. Grain as a weapon. Carter increased pressure on the Soviets to abandon the war in Afghanistan by issuing a trade embargo on 2 U.S. goods that the country desperately needed: grain and information technology. It also restricted Soviet fishing in American-controlled ocean waters. The United States team, which consisted of more than 160 athletes, coaches, and support staff, could not compete in the Moscow Games. My friend, the late Shelley Saltman, who I know is listening to this now on some birder phone. Hi, Shelley. See you hopefully in 15 years. Passed away a few years ago. Organized the tribute to the American athletes, and his boyhood friend from Boston, Lenny Nimoy, Mr. Spock, Leonard Nimoy, was the MC of that big gala event in Los Angeles. To further emphasize that he was meaning business and American athletes could not compete, Carter threatened to revoke the passport of an athlete who disobeyed his order. The Soviet boycott. Carter did get other countries to follow his lead, but was unable to persuade Britain, France, Greece, and Australia to go along with his policy. Canada and West Germany and Japan joined the boycott. The initiative, a total failure. By the way, the Lake Placid Olympic Village, it was the home of John Gotti. It is now a prison. The 1980 Lake Placid Olympic legacy includes turning the Olympic Village into an upstate New York prison. That is my friend Rennie Henry. And Rennie was part of the original group that got the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. And they tried to meet with Jimmy Carter in 1977. It was Rennie, it was Peter Ueberroth, and the perfect name for a lawyer, James Argue, R-U-G-U-E, who were in the White House. They never saw Carter. Peter Ueberroth and the Los Angeles Olympics Committee probably saved the modern Olympics. The International Olympic Committee gives Los Angeles the Games in 1984, no requirements of new venues. No other group bid for the Games in 1977. Actually, there was almost another group. There were people interested in Tehran, Iran, but you know what was going on there with the Shah during those days, so they weren't going to touch it. The LAOC head, Peter Ueberroth, commercialized the Games, and the LAOC turned a profit. And that is 1984, and that is the Olympic Stadium. The Soviets and the Warsaw Pact countries boycotted the 1984 Olympic Games. Virtually every Olympics since 1984 has lost money. The 2004 Athens Games contributed to Greece's insolvency. The Atlanta legacy of 1996 Summer Games? None. Really none. But there was this. Richard Jewell was a security guard and law enforcement officials who alerted police during the Centennial Olympic Park bombing at the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia. He discovered a backpack containing 3 pipe bombs on the park grounds and helped evacuate the area before the bomb exploded, saving many people from injury or death. For months afterwards, he was suspected of planting the bomb, resulting in adverse publicity that came to symbolize the excesses of law enforcement and the news media. After he was dismissed as a subject, Jewell filed libel suits against NBC News, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. By the way, in a couple of weeks, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution will be printing its final ever print edition. It's going online, and that's it. It's online. CNN, the New York Post, and Piedmont College. The Atlanta legacy, well, there was a movie about Richard Jewell. Even though NBC stood by its story, the network agreed to pay Jewell $500,000. Go away. Richard Jewell, a biographic drama movie, was released in the United States December 13th, 2019. That is the Atlantic Olympic Stadium, which was reduced in size to hold Atlanta Braves baseball, and was again reduced in size because after 20 years, Atlanta Braves organization moved to the suburbs, and it's now a small college football field. Centennial Olympic Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia has been renovated twice. After the Olympics, it was downsized, used as the home for Major League Baseball's Atlanta Braves franchise. After baseball left in 2016, the stadium was purchased by Georgia State University. It was downsized and is used as a multi-use athletic facility. Texas wants the 2012 Olympics, and that is George W. Bush as governor of Texas, and he's putting aside money for either Houston or Dallas to hold the 2012 Summer Olympics. The International Olympic Committee requires host cities to put money away in the event the Games lose money. George W. Bush, in the lead-up to the USOC picking a candidate for the 2012 Olympics, set aside $100 million as Texas governor in the event Houston or Dallas got the Olympics nod. Sydney had the Games in 2000, and they're still paying hundreds of millions of dollars of Australian dollars to maintain unused facilities. The United States had more troops on the ground in Utah to protect the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics in 2002 than in Afghanistan after the September 11th, 2001 attacks. Athens. The 2004 Athens Games were a major financial drain on Greece and remain so to this day. The IOC wanted Italy to change drug laws to protect doping athletes from being arrested in 2006. Let us take care of it. It's not against the law, they're just breaking Olympic rules. China. Despite allegations of human rights abuses, China was accepted in the world community by hosting the 2008 Games. The Vancouver 2010 Olympic deal included censorship of speakers at libraries. You hear that, Rosa? If I was talking about this, you couldn't hire me. The
I
Olympic
hear
Committee.
you.
Yeah, the Olympic Committee would never have allowed you to allow me to speak about the Olympics in the lead up to the Olympic Games, the Winter Games in 2010. Censorship. Actually, I should throw that into my censorship talk. But you can improve mass transit with an Olympics And Vancouver now does have a train that goes from the Vancouver airport to downtown. And that's a picture while I'm sitting in my car waiting for a light to change that I took in Vancouver about 8 years ago. Sochi, Russia. That is Brazil, a stadium in Manaus, Brazil. And that's South Korea. That was where baseball was played. $109 million arena. Tokyo, and they're all banded. Tokyo 2020, 2021, and COVID-19. The United States track and field, along with the U.S. Olympic swimming committees, formally told the United States Olympic committee that the two groups really didn't want to go to Japan in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Brazilian Olympic Committee released a statement urging that the Tokyo Games should be postponed until 2021 because of health concerns or rising COVID-19 infection rates. In Norway, the Olympic Committee's statement was simple. Our clear recommendations is that the Olympic Games in Tokyo shall not take place before the COVID-19 situation is under firm control on a global scale. COVID-19 spread globally. IOC President and the Prime Minister of Japan have concluded that the games of the 32nd Olympiad in Tokyo must be rescheduled to a date beyond 2012, but not later than summer 2021 to safeguard the health of athletes, everybody involved in the Olympic Games, and the international community. Thomas Bach was the president of the IOC. The pandemic. Attention those, this is March 2021, no overseas visitors. Attention those who are planning to go to Japan this summer to catch some action at the Tokyo Olympics. Japan just canceled your trip to the country. Currently, the COVID-19 situation in Japan and many other countries around the world is still very challenging, and a number of variant strains have emerged while international travel remains severely restricted globally. The Tokyo Games did take place in 2021, and Japan was left with an enormous debt. Beijing 2022. There were calls for an Olympic athletes boycott because of the human rights issue in China. The Uyghurs' oppression and the missing Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai. The United States accused China of committing genocide on the Uyghurs. There were also questions about the origin of the COVID-19 illness and whether China could have done more to stop its spread in 2019. China put out a statement about the diplomatic boycott, which took place. Joe Biden did not go, nor did other leaders, to the opening ceremonies. It is a travesty of the Olympic spirit. It is political provocation and an offense to the 1.4 billion Chinese people. If the U.S. is insistent on going down the wrong path, China will take necessary and resolute countermeasures. Beijing 2022. United States President Joe Biden and the First Lady Jill Biden did not attend the Beijing Olympics opening ceremony. It's another boycott. American politicians and a number of other countries' leaders were not happy with China's human rights records, Uyghur opposition or oppression, and there was the curious story of the missing Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai. The games must go on, though, and they did go on. Athletes in the 2022 Beijing Winter Games had to live within the boundaries of China's rights for expression. Any athletes who spoke out about human rights conditions, no matter where they live, could be arrested for talking. It's more than just sports. Olympics, just more than sports. Yang Shu, the Deputy Director General of Beijing 2022's International Relations Department, said that protests that violate the Olympic spirit or against Chinese laws and regulations will be subjected to certain punishment. The Russians invaded Ukraine during the Beijing Olympics, violating an Olympic decree of do not start a war during the Olympics. The Ukraine invasion. The Russians invaded Ukraine during the 2022 Games and violated the Olympic truce. The Russians and Belarusians were tossed from the 2022 Beijing Paralympics as countries attempted to isolate Russia for the invasion. French elected officials did not want Russians at the 2024 Paris Summer Olympics. The Olympic truce, what's that? Through its Resolution 48-11 of the October 25th, 1993 The General Assembly urged member states to observe the Olympic truce from the seventh day before the opening to the seventh day following the closing of each Olympic Games. That includes the Paralympic Games, which means it's about a 42-day period. Paris 2024. A look back at the Paris 2024. I forgot to tell you this before I go on to the conclusion here. Paris 2024 had the biggest security sweep of all time, and a ceremony honoring the slain Olympians from the 1972 Olympics was put on the shelf because of Gaza's war with Israel, and they just felt it was not safe in Paris to hold a public event honoring those athletes who were slain and the coaches slain in 1972. So, the Olympics, it's more than just a sporting event. The modern Olympics began in Athens in 1896, quickly became politicized. No women involved. Women started their own Olympics. The 1936 Berlin Games, 1964 Tokyo Games, 1968 Mexico Games, 72 Munich Games, 76 the Montreal Games, 1980 Los Angeles, 1984 of course in Los Angeles, and then in 2020 with the Tokyo and the COVID, and the Chinese hosting the Olympics in 2024. And now, well, you have games that next go round, at least in the summer, will be in Los Angeles. Very quiet about the Los Angeles games right now. And of course, there will be the games in Italy in 2026 in February. And nobody is talking about the money situation there, but I can't imagine that they are not over budget. France was totally over budget for the 2024 games. Anyway, any questions, any comments? It is your turn to talk. Anybody? Well, if nobody has anything to say, we can pack it up.